The rain came in sideways that Tuesday night, driving hard against the glass face of Caldwell Tower, like it had a personal grievance with the building. 42 floors up, the city looked the way it always looked from up there. Distant, glittering, completely indifferent to whatever was happening inside its walls. Down below the streets were dark rivers of reflected neon, cabs cutting through standing water, a man in a doorway pulling his collar up against the cold. Chicago in November, mean and unbothered, doing what it always did. Nora Voss did not see any of that. She was in the basement. She was always in the basement. The sub-level accounting office of Caldwell Group occupied a space the building's original architects had probably intended for storage. Low ceilings, fluorescent tubes that hummed at a frequency that bored into the back of your skull after 4 hours. The carpet was the color of old mustard and smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how many times facilities claimed to have treated it. 3 workstations, 2 printers, 1 microwave that had been broken for 14 months and never replaced, because no one in upper management had ever once walked down the stairwell to witness the state of the place. Nora's desk was the one in the far corner, back against the wall, facing the room. Old habit. She had been sitting with her back to walls since she was 9 years old. It was 11:47 at night, and she was still here. That was not unusual. She was often still here at this hour. Her contract said 40 hours a week. She worked 65 minimum. Not because anyone asked her to, not because anyone noticed, but because the work was the one place in her life where the noise stopped, where nobody could look at her the way people looked at her in the elevator or in the break room on the 31st floor. The break room she had stopped using 2 years ago after Desmond Wraith stood in the doorway of this very office loud enough for both other accountants to hear and said it was amazing what passed for talent these days when you lowered the standards far enough. She had not looked up from her monitor. She never looked up. Numbers did not have eyes. Numbers did not have mouths that curled at the corners when she walked into a room. Numbers simply were what they were. And if you were patient enough and careful enough and willing to stay in the basement long enough, numbers always told the truth. Tonight, they were telling her something she did not want to hear. She had been running a supplemental audit of Caldwell Group's third quarter receivables for 6 weeks. Nobody had assigned it. Nobody knew she was doing it. It had started as an idle cross-reference, a rounding discrepancy in one of the offshore subsidiary ledgers, the kind of thing most accountants would chalk up to currency conversion lag and move on from without a second thought. Nora was not most accountants. She had a particular relationship with anomalies. They bothered her the way a splinter bothers a fingertip, not enough to stop what you are doing, but impossible to truly ignore. The rounding discrepancy had been $412. 6 weeks later, that $412 had led her here, to this spreadsheet. At 1:45 in a basement that smelled like old carpet and fluorescent light, staring at something that made her feel like the floor had dropped 6 inches beneath her chair. She pulled up the third shell company file and checked the incorporation date again. Meridian Strategies, LLC, registered in Delaware. 18 months ago. 18 months was important. 18 months ago was when Marcus Vane had restructured his entire financial architecture following a federal investigation that had ultimately come to nothing, but had spooked every senior figure in the organization. Meridian had been set up inside that window of restructuring, which meant whoever created it had done so knowing the internal systems would be temporarily chaotic. A good time to plant something. A very good time. She opened the linked entity chart she had built over the past 2 weeks. It covered most of her second monitor, a web of companies, Meridian Strategies, then a second entity called Stone Ridge Advisory, then 4 more beneath that, each one adding another layer of distance from the original transaction point. The money entered the Caldwell network through routine operational receivables, construction contracts, venue licensing, logistics invoicing, nothing that looked remarkable on the surface. Then it hit a series of internal transfers, and something interesting happened. A small percentage of each transaction, never more than 0.7%, got redirected through a clearing account into Meridian's operating fund. Individually meaningless. Across 18 months of high-volume transactions, catastrophic. Nora had calculated the total 3 times because she could not bring herself to accept the first 2 answers. $11,400,000, give or take. She sat back in her chair and listened to the hum of the fluorescent lights. $11,400,000 from an organization that moved enough money that this amount should have been visible if anyone had been looking. But nobody had been looking, or someone had made sure nobody was. Because the second thing Nora had noticed, the thing she had sat with for 2 days before she could make herself write it down, was that the authorization signatures on the transfer initiation forms belonged to someone with Level 4 clearance. There were 6 people in Caldwell Group with Level 4 clearance. Marcus Vane was one of them. Desmond Wraith was another. She stared at the name for a long time. Desmond Wraith, senior captain, Marcus Vane's right hand for 11 years. The man who had stood in the doorway of this basement office and looked at Nora with the particular expression of someone who does not see a person and said what he said loud enough for everyone to hear. She had not looked up. She was looking up now. Nora pressed her palms flat against the desk and made herself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her therapist had taught her 4 years ago before she stopped being able to afford the sessions. She went through it methodically, what she had, what it meant, what the options were. Option 1. She could close the file, delete her working documents, and never think about this again. Go back to the assigned work. Keep her head down. Keep surviving. She considered that option for about 8 seconds before her stomach turned hard. Option 2. She could go to compliance. Except compliance at Caldwell Group was not the SEC. Compliance here reported to Terrence Galt, who reported to Desmond Wraith. She might as well hand-deliver the evidence to the man himself. Option 3 was the one her mind kept sliding away from, the one that made her pulse do something erratic and unpleasant. Option 3 was Marcus Vane himself. She had never spoken to Marcus Vane. She had seen him twice. Once in the lobby when he came through with his security detail and did not look at the people stepping out of his way, and once through the glass wall of the 42nd floor conference room where she had gone to drop off printed reports. He had been standing at the head of the table with both hands planted on the surface, saying something to the men around him in a voice too low to carry through the glass. She remembered thinking that he looked exactly like what he was. Not in a cinematic way, not theatrical, just precise. Still the kind of still that is not peace, but something sharper. A man who had learned that the less he moved, the more dangerous he became. She closed the spreadsheet, then opened it again, closed it again. Then she plugged in her personal encrypted drive and started copying files. She was still copying files at 12:18 in the morning when the building's alarm went off. Nora's first thought was false alarm. It happened twice a year. Someone in the kitchen on 16 usually. She reached for her bag out of habit and then stopped, because the alarm was not the standard fire tone. The building had 3 alarm configurations. Nora knew all 3 because she had once, during a particularly slow fiscal quarter, read the entire building management system, manual, cover to cover. Standard fire was a repeating 2-tone pulse. Emergency evacuation was continuous. The third configuration, the one currently reverberating through the basement corridor, was a security lockdown. 3 pulses, pause. 3 pulses. Like a distress signal that most people in the building had probably never heard and would not recognize. Nora recognized it because she had read the manual. She pulled out her earpiece and sat completely still for 3 seconds. Then she stood, walked to the basement corridor, and looked both ways. Empty. The service elevator light at the end of the hall showed all cabs stationary. She moved to the stairwell door at the far end, which had a narrow wire glass window, and looked through. Movement 1 level up. Shadows moving fast. Too fast. And in the wrong direction. They were going up, not down. People do not go up during an evacuation. Her chest did something complicated. She went back to her desk, unplugged the encrypted drive, and slipped it into the inner pocket of her blazer. Then she opened the bottom drawer and took out the building schematic she had printed 3 months ago when facilities had asked her to review infrastructure costs. And she had become briefly fascinated by the ventilation layout. She spread it on the desk and looked at it. The building had 3 main elevator banks and 2 service shafts. It also had a maintenance corridor network on the sublevels that connected to a secondary stairwell on the north face. A stairwell added during renovation 4 years ago that was not on the publicly posted evacuation maps because someone in facilities had never updated the standard documentation. Nora had flagged that discrepancy in a report that nobody had read. She knew where the corridor was. She folded the schematic into her blazer pocket alongside the drive and went to find the unmarked steel door at the end of the sub-level hall. The keypad lock had been replaced 8 months ago. The work order had listed the default code with a note saying it would be changed. Nobody had changed it. She entered the code. The door opened. Inside was different air, warmer, smelling of machine oil and concrete dust. A single LED strip ran along the ceiling. Motion activated, throwing harsh white light in a 20-foot radius. She moved, and the light followed her. She checked the schematic. Left at the first junction, past the elevator motor rooms for banks A and B, then right along the service corridor, running behind the building's main mechanical spine. She was looking for access panel B7, which connected to the freight elevator that went all the way to 42. She found the junction and turned left. Then she heard voices. She went still, instantly pressing herself flat against the wall. The voices were coming from the direction of the A-Bank motor room. Clipped, low, professional. 2 distinct speakers. She caught fragments through the concrete. Confirm position. Then, clearly and unmistakably, Vane's in the panic room. He's not followed. 4 minutes. A static burst cut the rest short. Nora's heart was very loud in the maintenance corridor. 4 minutes. They were on a timed operation, coordinated. The people she had seen through the stairwell window were either a diversion or a secondary team. The primary action was somewhere above. And if Marcus was already in the panic room, either he had warning or someone had moved him. But if the team here was still operating, it meant the objective had not been completed, which meant she moved faster, abandoning caution in favor of speed, her flat shoes nearly silent on the concrete floor. She reached B7, found the access panel, got it open with the flat edge of her ID badge after 30 seconds of fumbling that felt like 30 minutes. The freight elevator was waiting, doors open. Big enough for a pallet jack. She stepped in, hit the mechanical key override with the code from the work order she had memorized, and punched 42. The elevator moved. It was not fast. It was a freight elevator. It moved at the speed of something that did not care about urgency. Nora counted floors. She had her phone out and was trying to decide who to call, and realizing she had no number for Marcus Vane, no number for anyone with the authority to do anything about what was happening. She had tried the security emergency line from the basement. No answer, which meant operations were either overwhelmed or compromised. She thought about the 2 voices in the motor room. 4 minutes. She was at floor 28. She put her phone away and looked around the elevator for anything useful. A tool cabinet bolted to the wall with a magnetic closure. She opened it. Wrenches, pipe connectors, wire ties, and a heavy-duty flashlight. Steel-bodied, roughly the weight and feel of a police baton. She took it in her right hand. Floor 36. She looked at her reflection in the freight elevator's polished steel door panel. Her hair was coming out of its elastic. Her blazer was rumpled from where she had pressed herself against the maintenance corridor wall. She looked pale and too wide around the middle, the way she always looked. The way she had tried and failed to feel neutral about for 31 years. She looked, she thought, like someone who had absolutely no business being in a freight elevator going to a crime scene. She squared her shoulders. Floor 40, the elevator slowed. Floor 42. The doors opened onto a service corridor she had never seen. Narrow, utilitarian, the working side of the building's most expensive real estate. She stepped out, and her ears registered sound immediately. Somewhere ahead and to the right, something heavy had recently impacted something else. A muffled sound cut short. Something overturned. She moved toward it because she had apparently stopped being rational, somewhere between the basement and floor 38. The service corridor opened into a secondary hallway that ran perpendicular to the main 42nd floor corridor. Through a half-open door ahead of her, she could see the edge of an enormous room. The executive conference space adjacent to Marcus Vane's private office. Crystal and steel aesthetic, dark wood. She moved to the doorway and looked through. The room was destroyed, not dramatically, not explosion destroyed, but the specific violence of a space where a fight had happened fast. A chair overturned, glass on the floor from a drinking glass, not a window. Two members of Marcus's security detail were down along the far wall, alive by the look of their positioning, but restrained with heavy-duty zip ties at their wrists. Whoever had done this had been thorough enough to secure them rather than simply incapacitate them. And in the center of the room, facing the door to Marcus's private office, stood a man in dark tactical clothing and a balaclava, a compact suppressed pistol raised at shoulder height. He had not heard her. He was focused on the door. Nora looked at the flashlight in her hand and thought, "This is the most absurd situation I have ever been in." She also thought he is going to go through that door in about 30 seconds. She thought about the 4-minute window the voices in the motor room had referenced. She thought about how long she had been in the elevator. She thought about the drive in her pocket and the $11 million and Desmond Wraith's name on the authorization forms. And she thought about what happens to evidence when the man it is meant to protect is no longer alive to receive it. Worthless and dangerous at the same time. She was so tired of being overlooked. Nora Voss stepped into the room, drew her arm back with the particular muscle memory of 2 years playing softball in high school before her knee gave out, and threw the steel flashlight with everything she had. She had always had a good arm. The flashlight crossed the room in a flat, hard line and caught the man across the side of his head with a sound like a bat connecting. He went sideways. The pistol fired once into the ceiling as his trigger finger spasmed. He went down. The door to Marcus Vane's private office exploded open. Marcus came through it in one motion, not the cautious movement of a man who had been barricaded, the immediate violence of someone who had been waiting for an opening. Dark shirt, no jacket, a gun in his hand, blood on his neck from a cut she could not fully see. He swept the room in less than a second, taking in the man on the floor, the 2 restrained security guards, and then Nora Voss, standing in the doorway to the service corridor, breathing hard, empty-handed, hair falling out of its elastic. He stared at her. She stared back. Somewhere below them in the maintenance corridor or the stairwells or both, there were still people with weapons and objectives. The building was still in lockdown. The man she had hit was on the floor, and she could not tell how badly he was hurt. And Marcus Vane was looking at her with an expression she had absolutely never seen anyone direct at her before. Not contempt, not dismissal, something much more complicated than either of those things. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question in tone, though it had the syntax of one, the flat register of a man assessing a variable he had not accounted for. Nora's mouth was dry. "I work in your basement," she said. "I found something in your accounts. I think that is why they are here." Marcus's eyes moved to the encrypted drive she had pulled from her pocket. She had not realized she had done it until it was already in her hand, held up slightly, like evidence, like an offering, like the one thing that might make her worth keeping alive in a room that had just become very dangerous. The silence lasted exactly as long as it took for a second set of footsteps to appear in the corridor behind her. Nora turned, two more of them moving fast. She looked back at Marcus. He grabbed her arm and pulled her through the door into his private office before the corridor filled with gunfire. The door slammed shut between them and everything that was coming. Nora stood in Marcus Vane's private office with her heart hammering against her ribs and the drive still in her hand, and the absolute certainty that her life had just divided itself permanently into before tonight and after tonight. And there was no version of after tonight that looked anything like the life she had been living. The door held for now. Marcus moved to the reinforced panel at the far wall, the panic room entrance. She now understood and looked back at her with that same unreadable expression. "How much do you know?" he said. Everything Nora said. She was surprised to find that her voice was completely steady. Outside, something heavy hit the office door. Marcus Vane studied her face for 3 full seconds. Then he opened the panic room and stepped aside. And Nora Voss, who had spent 4 years making herself invisible in a basement 41 floors below, this one walked through. The panic room smelled like recycled air and cold metal, and the particular tension of a space designed for surviving the worst night of your life. Nora had read about panic rooms the way she read about most things she would never personally encounter, in passing, with the detached curiosity of someone who lived at a significant remove from the kind of wealth and danger that required them. She had imagined something stark and utilitarian, a box. This was not a box. 12 feet by 16 roughly, reinforced composite walls, a ceiling-mounted ventilation system humming at a frequency just below conscious awareness. One wall held a bank of 8 security monitors, though 4 were showing static, which meant either the cameras were down or someone had taken them down deliberately. A supply shelf with water, a medical kit, communications equipment, a narrow bench along the back wall. Marcus went directly to the monitor bank. Nora stayed near the door, not because she was planning to open it. The sounds coming through the reinforced steel had stopped, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse. She stayed near the door because it was her body's idea of maintaining an option she technically did not have. She watched him study the screens. His back was to her, and she could see the cut on his neck more clearly now. A shallow laceration above the collar, the kind you get from broken glass, or a blade that had not fully connected. It had bled enough to stain his collar dark, then mostly stopped. He did not touch it. He was processing information the way she processed numbers, methodically, without the luxury of reaction. 2 hostiles still active on 39, Marcus said, without turning around. Security team regrouping in the lobby. Lockdown holding. He paused. The team that came through the maintenance corridor. That was your entry point. Yes. I heard 2 of them in the motor room, Nora said. They mentioned 4 minutes. That was about 6 minutes ago now. He turned then, not all the way, 3/4, enough to look at her over his shoulder, dark eyes, close set, the kind that had spent years learning to give very little away except intelligence. You threw a flashlight at a trained operative. I had a good angle, Nora said. He repeated it in a tone that was not quite disbelief and not quite anything else she had a name for. I played softball, she said, 2 years before my knee. She stopped herself. That is not relevant. Marcus turned back to the monitors. Sit down. I am fine standing. I was not asking. She sat on the bench. He pulled up the feed for the 42nd floor corridor and watched it for a moment. 2 of his security team had made it up and were moving through the space she had come from. Controlled, professional. The immediate threat was receding. She could feel it in the quality of the air, the way tension has a physical texture when it starts to ease. Marcus turned fully to face her. Show me. Nora held up the drive. I need a port. He went to the supply shelf, moved 2 items, and produced a slim laptop stored in a padded case. He set it on the bench beside her, opened it, powered it on. She plugged in the drive. The folder structure appeared. She opened the master file. The entity chart spread across the screen, covering the visual space of a highway map. Marcus pulled the bench slightly and sat beside her. Not close, but close enough to see the screen clearly. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and studied it. Nora did not look at him. She looked at the screen and walked him through it. She had expected to be nervous. She was nervous. Her hands were doing something she chose to ignore. But she was also in the part of any problem she was most at home in, the part where the data did the talking. She walked him through the rounding discrepancy that had started it. The Meridian LLC Incorporation, the Stone Ridge chain, the clearance signature trail. She was precise. She did not editorialize. She let the numbers say what the numbers said. He did not interrupt her once. When she finished, the room was quiet, except for the ventilation hum. Marcus stared at the entity chart for a long time. She watched his jaw work. A small movement, controlled immediately. But it was there. The first crack in the surface. Just a hairline. How long, he said. The operation has been running approximately 18 months, she said. The full extraction total is $11,400,000. How long have you known? She understood the distinction he was making. I confirmed it tonight before the alarm. I have been building the picture for 6 weeks. 6 weeks he said it the way you say a number when the number is wrong. You sat on this for 6 weeks. I was trying to make sure I was right. She held his gaze. I wanted to be completely certain before I brought it to anyone, because I knew what would happen if I brought it to the wrong person. And what is that? I disappear. Something moved through his expression, not sympathy. She did not think sympathy was an instrument Marcus Vane regularly used. Acknowledgement, maybe. The recognition of a calculation he would have made himself. Who else knows? Nobody. I work in the basement. I do not have lunch with anyone. I do not have drinks with anyone. I process this alone on an air-gapped personal drive that has been in my blazer pocket for 3 days because I did not trust leaving it in the building. She looked back at the screen. Nobody knows. He was quiet. Then Wraith. Yes. The name landed between them with a specific weight. Marcus sat back slightly. Not retreating. The opposite of retreating, actually. The movement of a man who needed a half-inch of physical space to process something without it reading on his face. Nora had seen Desmond Wraith in this building dozens of times. She had seen the way people responded to him. The particular deference that indicated not just rank, but history. Trust accumulated over years. She knew the way you know things about the architecture of a place you occupy without anyone telling you that Desmond Wraith was as close to Marcus Vane as anyone in this organization got. She waited. Marcus stood. He went to the monitor bank and pulled up a different feed. The exterior east face of the building. Loading area. He stood there with his hands at his sides. She watched the muscles in his back through the dark fabric of his shirt. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say. She had delivered the information. What happened next was not her territory, except it was her territory now, whether she had chosen it or not. You understand what you have walked into, Marcus said. It was not a question. I had a reasonable understanding before I got in the freight elevator, Nora said. The understanding has become more complete since then. He turned. You could have left. You were in the maintenance corridor. You knew the secondary stairwell. You could have walked out of the building. I know. Why did you not? Nora looked at the drive still plugged into the laptop. The entity chart still on the screen. $11 million. Desmond Wraith's name. 4 years of fluorescent lighting and carpet that smelled like mildew. A break room she had stopped using because of one comment delivered with a specific expression. Her mother's medical bills sitting in a folder on her kitchen table 30 miles from here. $43,000 past due, and the payment plan she was barely keeping pace with, and the specialist appointment in January she was already planning to cancel because the copay was going to break her. She thought about the fact that she had spent 4 years in this building making herself invisible. She was tired of being invisible. Because I was tired, she said. Tired of knowing things and having nowhere to put them. Tired of being the person nobody looks at, she paused. And because the evidence dies if you die. And I spent 6 weeks building it. Marcus studied her for a long moment. In the blue light of the monitors, with the ventilation humming, he looked at her the way she imagined he looked at a contract before he signed it. Thorough, without sentiment, looking for the weakness in the structure. Nora Voss, he said. Yes. Junior accountant. Sub-level office. Correct. You are the one who submitted the infrastructure documentation discrepancy report 14 months ago. She blinked. You read that. I read everything that comes through this building. A pause. I sent it back with a note to have it addressed. Facilities buried it. Nora opened her mouth and closed it again. She had not known that. She had assumed, as she assumed about most of her work, that it had disappeared into the administrative void unread. The maintenance corridor code, Marcus said, the freight elevator override, the building schematic. He tilted his head slightly. You knew all of that. I read the documentation. Nobody reads the documentation. I do. She held his gaze. I read everything that comes through the office, every contract, every filing, every facilities request, because I did not have anything else to do with the hours. She said it flatly, not asking for sympathy, just the fact of it. Something shifted in his expression, not pity, recalibration. A sound from outside the panic room then. Sharp, organized, the pattern of Marcus's own security team. He moved to a panel beside the door, pressed a sequence, listened to a brief voice exchange, and stepped back. It is clear, he said. My team has the building. Nora stood. Her legs were steadier than she expected. She unplugged the drive. Marcus watched her put it back in her pocket. There is one thing you should know, she said, before we go through everything tomorrow. What? Desmond Wraith's authorization signature is on the transfer initiation forms. But there is a second signature on the confirmation layer, a co-authorization. I have not identified it yet. It is routed through an anonymizing layer I have not fully cracked. She met his eyes. Wraith did not do this alone. The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence, the kind that happens when a room that is already burning discovers it has a gas line running beneath it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. You are telling me there is a second traitor. I am telling you, the data indicates a second authorization, Nora said. Whether that constitutes a second traitor in the full sense, or a tool being used without full knowledge, she paused. That I do not know yet, but you will find out, given access to the internal network and enough time. Yes. He nodded slowly. The calculation was visible for just a moment in his eyes. Not the outcome of it, just the motion, the shifting of pieces on a board she could not fully see. He opened the panic room door and stepped aside, and Nora walked back out into the 42nd floor of Caldwell Tower, into the controlled aftermath of something violent with the drive in her pocket and the certainty that the second name was somewhere inside the data she had already built. She just had not found it yet. The room they gave her on the 38th floor had a bed, a bathroom, a keypad on the inside of the door that she could engage from within. Secured, not imprisoned. Someone had thought about that distinction. She appreciated it without saying so. She sat on the edge of the bed with the drive in her hands and listened to the building settle around her. Below, somewhere in the floors between here and the lobby, Marcus's team was still moving. She could feel it in the way a building communicates when you have spent enough time in its bones, the faint vibration of organized purpose. Footsteps in patterns, doors opening and closing with intention. The second authorization was still out there, still unnamed, still waiting. She lay back on the bed without taking off her blazer and stared at the ceiling and let her mind do what it did when she stopped forcing it. Not sleep, something adjacent to sleep. The state she had learned to enter during long audit sessions when the data would not resolve cleanly and the only answer was to let it sit until the pattern surfaced on its own. She ran the IP cluster data through her memory the way she ran ledger columns, not forcing it, just letting the structure breathe. The third cluster had always been the problem: irregular timestamps, traffic patterns that did not follow a standard work schedule. Someone who moved through the organization at its edges, senior enough to hold level 4 clearance, not present in the daily rhythm of the building. She was at floor 38 in a room that smelled like recycled air and institutional carpet at 3:47 in the morning when it came together. Not on the drive. The drive was encrypted and she had no network access. It came from her own memory, which was the most reliable database she had ever worked with, and tonight the most precise. 8 months ago, a facility's budget request for a network infrastructure upgrade on the executive floors. It had come through her office because all operational expenditures above $50,000 required sub-level accounting verification before approval. She had processed it in 40 minutes, flagged 2 line items for clarification, sent it back up the chain. The signatory on the original request had been Elliot Crane. She sat up. Elliot Crane, External Affairs, City Council Relationships, 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore French-cuffed shirts to operational meetings and spoke in the measured cadences of someone who had spent 30 years learning to say nothing while appearing to say everything. He had been with the Caldwell organization for 19 years, longer than Wraith, longer than anyone except Marcus himself. He was the organizational memory, the man who knew where every boundary was, where every relationship lived, who owed what, to whom, and since when. The network upgrade request. She was seeing it clearly now. She had near-perfect recall of documents she had processed, could reconstruct them in sequence if she concentrated. The request had included a line item for auxiliary server access points on floors 38 through 42. She had flagged it because the cost per access point was 30% above market rate. Crane's office had responded with a vendor justification she had accepted because the vendor was on the approved list, and she was a junior accountant in a basement who did not have the standing to push back a second time. Auxiliary server access points. Physical hardware on the executive floors. Hardware that, if configured correctly, could function as an internal traffic router, capturing and redirecting data packets, masking the origin of authorization requests, creating exactly the kind of irregular traffic pattern she had identified in the third IP cluster. Crane had not been using his own credentials to co-authorize the transfers. He had built infrastructure that let him use someone else's. The cold moved from her chest outward to her hands. Because if Crane was using a hardware relay to mask his traffic, the co-authorization signature on the transfer forms was not appearing under his name. It was appearing under a borrowed identity, and the most logical identity to borrow was the one with the highest clearance, the one whose authorization would never be questioned, the one that would make the entire transaction invisible to any internal review. She stood up from the bed so fast she knocked the drive off the mattress. She picked it up with fingers that were not quite steady and stood in the center of the room and made herself think it through completely before she let herself react to it. Crane had built a hardware relay on the executive floors. He had used it to route his co-authorization traffic through a borrowed credential. The co-signature on every transfer form, buried 5 layers deep in the document chain, was almost certainly appearing under Marcus Vane's own name. His credentials, borrowed without his knowledge through physical hardware installed in his own building. Wraith had taken the money, but the paper trail pulled without understanding the relay infrastructure pointed directly at Marcus. This was not an embezzlement operation. It was a removal operation. Wraith and Crane were not stealing from Marcus Vane. They were building a case against him, a financial record that presented to the right people, federal investigators, rival organizations, the city council. Contacts Crane managed would destroy Marcus completely. His credibility, his freedom, his organization. The money was secondary. The money was the mechanism. The real target was the man's empire. And the assassination team that had come through the building tonight was not a backup plan. It was the closing move. They had built the paper trail. They were going to present it after Marcus was dead and could not defend himself. Clean succession. Wraith steps up. Crane manages the political fallout. The financial evidence gets leaked as justification after the fact. The organization restructures under new leadership with a narrative already in place. Except Marcus had not died, which meant the timeline was broken, which meant Wraith and Crane knew the closing move had failed, which meant they would move to contingency fast. Nora went to the door and disengaged the lock and opened it. The guard posted outside was one of Marcus's men, mid-20s, professional posture, tired eyes. He looked at her with mild surprise. "I need to speak to Marcus Vane," she said, "right now." "Ma'am, it is almost 4 in the I know what time it is." She held the man's gaze and put into her voice the thing she had been practicing for years without knowing she was practicing it. The particular register of someone who is not asking. Get him on the phone. Tell him Nora Voss has identified the second authorization source. Tell him it changes everything about tonight. The guard looked at her for a moment, assessed the request, assessed the requester, assessed the risk of waking Marcus Vane, at 3:47 in the morning versus the risk of not waking him. He reached for his radio. Marcus came back to her in less than 90 seconds. Not his voice on the radio, his actual presence. He came down the corridor from the direction of the main elevator with the particular energy of someone who had not slept and was not bothered by it. Same dark shirt, the cut on his neck clean now, and closed with a narrow strip of medical tape. He looked at her face and did not ask how she was. "Tell me," he said. She told him. Standing in the doorway of the room on 38 in the corridor, with its muted lighting and the faint smell of the building at night, she walked him through it in 8 minutes. Crane, the network infrastructure request, the auxiliary access points, the hardware relay, the borrowed credential, and what it all meant when you assembled it into a complete picture. Marcus listened without moving. When she finished, the corridor was very quiet. He said one word, "Crane." Not a question. The particular stillness of a man receiving something that rearranges the geometry of the last 19 years in the space of 8 minutes. Then he turned to Owen Mace, who had appeared at the far end of the corridor at some point during her explanation without her noticing. "Get Crane on the phone," Marcus said. "He is not going to be reachable," Nora said. Both men looked at her. If Crane is as careful as the infrastructure suggests, he had a contingency protocol for tonight. If the operation failed, he goes dark. No calls, no location, trace nothing until he surfaces with his next move. She paused. "You are not going to find him by calling him." Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said to Owen, "Pull the building security footage for every Crane visit in the last 6 months, every floor, every timestamp." Owen nodded and moved away, pulling out his phone. Marcus stepped into the room and closed the door. They were alone, and the room felt smaller than it had at midnight. Nora was aware in the way you become aware of things when you have not slept, and your nervous system has been running at emergency capacity for 4 hours that she was in a room with a man she had met 6 hours ago who ran a criminal organization and who now had, thanks to her, both significant information and a significant problem. She sat down on the bed because her legs were asking her to. Marcus moved to the opposite wall and leaned against it with his arms crossed, looking at the floor. 19 years, he said, not to her, to whatever calculation he was running behind his eyes. She said nothing. There was nothing to say that the silence was not already saying. Then he pushed off the wall and looked at her. "The paper trail," he said, "the credential borrowing. If you had not found this, the evidence would have been presented after tonight." "After you were dead," Nora said. "The story would have been that you had been moving money out of your own organization for 18 months, that Wraith discovered it, that there was an internal confrontation and you did not survive it." She met his eyes. Clean narrative. Crane handles the city council side. Wraith manages the succession. By the time anyone with an interest in the real story went looking, the hardware relay would have been pulled and the evidence chain would point at you with nothing intact to contradict it. "How many people in this building know what you know?" Marcus said. The question was not a threat, or not only a threat, it was a genuine security calculation. The answer determined the radius of danger. Nobody, she said. Owen heard the outline just now in the corridor. Before that, only you. Marcus said Owen's name without inflection, just the name. And then he was quiet. I noticed something when I was speaking in the corridor, Nora said carefully. When I got to the part about the borrowed credential, I saw something in his expression, a tightening, brief and controlled, but there. She held Marcus's gaze. I am not telling you it means something certain. I am telling you I noticed it. Given everything else tonight, I thought you should know. She held his gaze. You decide what it means. That is your territory, not mine. Marcus turned away from her and looked at the wall. She watched him and said nothing, because this was the part that was his to carry. The weight of looking at people he had trusted for years and recalculating whether trust had ever been the accurate variable. 12 years with Owen Mace, 11 with Wraith, 19 with Crane. She had no framework for that kind of loss. Her losses were different. Smaller in scale, longer in duration, the slow accumulation of invisibility. His was a sudden collapse of everything he had built on the assumption that the people beside him were what they appeared to be. He turned back. His face was resolved. Whatever the internal process had been, it was complete. I need to move on this before sunrise, he said. Wraith will make contact in the morning. When he finds out the team did not complete the objective, he will need to read my response to calculate his next move. If I behave normally, it buys us time. If I behave like a man who knows he will accelerate. Nora said, yes. He paused. Can you reconstruct the evidence trail in a format that is presentable to the full Captain's Council? Not just raw data, a narrative, something that walks someone through it who does not read financial architecture. How long do I have? 6 hours. Nora looked at the drive. I will need network access to the internal system. Read only. Sandboxed. Marcus moved toward the door, then stopped. He looked back at her, and what crossed his face in that moment was something she had not seen in it before. Not the command expression, not the calculating stillness, something that was heavier than both of those things together. I set up the network access myself, he said. Not a deflection, a statement about who he trusted to touch it at this hour. Given what she had just told him about Owen, she understood exactly what that meant. Give me 2 hours, she said. He nodded and moved to the door. Marcus. He stopped. It was the first time she had used his name, and they both registered it. He turned slightly. The captain's, she said. When you present this, Wraith will be there, yes? He is going to come at me directly. The moment he sees me in that room, he will understand what I have. He will try to discredit me before the evidence speaks for itself. She paused. He will use everything he knows about how this organization sees me, my position, my appearance, the fact that I work in a basement and no one has ever taken me seriously. Marcus looked at her steadily. I am telling you this because I want you to know I am prepared for it. I am not asking you to protect me from it. She held his gaze. I am asking you to let me be the one to answer it. Something moved through his expression, brief and controlled. She was not sure she had a name for it yet. "The room will be yours," he said. He opened the door and went out. Nora sat with the drive in her hands and the laptop on the bed beside her, and 6 hours on the clock, and the specific, terrible clarity of someone who has passed through fear and come out on the other side into something harder and colder and more purposeful. She opened the laptop. She started building. At 6:40 in the morning, Marcus came back with network access credentials. He set a cup of coffee on the bench beside her without comment. She took it without looking up from the screen. He sat in the chair by the door and checked something on his phone. They did not speak for 40 minutes. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who were both working. At 6:58, her personal phone buzzed. She had almost forgotten she had it. It had been in her bag all night, and she had transferred the bag to the room on 38 without opening it. She looked at the screen, a number she did not recognize. Chicago area code. She answered, "Miss Voss." The voice was measured, unhurried, the particular cadence of someone who had spent 30 years learning to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "I think it is time we had a conversation." Nora's hand tightened on the phone. "Francis Algate." No. She stopped herself. Not Algate. "Elliot Crane." "I know what you found," Crane said, "and I know you have presented it to Marcus. That was predictable, given the circumstances. What is less predictable is what you have not found yet." Marcus had looked up from his phone. He was watching her face. Nora kept her voice level. "What have I not found?" "Your mother," Crane said, "Margaret Voss, currently receiving treatment at Mercy General for stage 2 cardiac insufficiency. $43,000 in outstanding medical debt, of which approximately $4,000 is 90 days past due. I know her doctor's name. I know her appointment schedule. I know the name of the pharmacy that fills her prescriptions." The room contracted. Nora did not let it show on her face. "I also know," Crane continued in the same measured tone, "that you are carrying forensic evidence. I want that drive, Miss Voss. I want you to remove it from the building and deliver it to an address I will provide. In exchange, your mother's debt is cleared entirely. Nothing in her life is disrupted in any way." He let that sit. Refuse and the disruption becomes significant. "How did you get this number?" Nora said. "I have known about your audit for 3 weeks. I knew about it before you confirmed it." A pause. "I allowed it to continue because I wanted to know how far you would get." The answer was farther than I anticipated. For the first time, something sharpened in his voice, just slightly. "That was a miscalculation. I am correcting it now." "You allowed it to continue," Nora said. "Yes. You knew I was building the evidence trail, and you let it run. I had containment options at every stage. I still do." The measured tone returned. "The drive, Miss Voss, and your silence, that is all I am asking." Nora looked at Marcus. He could not hear Crane's side of the call and was reading her face the way she had watched him read the monitors earlier. Precise, systematic, looking for the signal in the noise. She thought about her mother, the appointments, the prescriptions, The specific vulnerability of a woman who did not know that her daughter had spent the night in the eye of something catastrophic. She thought about what Crane had just told her without meaning to. He had known about the audit for 3 weeks. He had containment options. He was calling her directly at 6:58 in the morning from a number she had never given anyone asking for the drive. Crane was not operating from a position of strength. He was operating from managed panic, dressed in the costume of control. The timeline had broken last night. The closing move had failed. And now a man who had spent 19 years working in the background was making a direct phone call to a junior accountant because he was out of cleaner options. "I will need 2 hours," Nora said. A beat of silence. She could feel him recalibrating. 2 hours, he said. "I need to extract myself from the building without drawing attention. I will send the address in 30 minutes. Another pause. "Miss Voss, I want to be clear that I have no interest in unnecessary." She ended the call. Marcus was already on his feet. "Crane," she said. I gathered. His voice was flat. What did he offer? My mother's safety in exchange for the drive and my silence. She set the phone on the bed. Her hand was not shaking. She was mildly surprised by that. "He has known about the audit for 3 weeks. He says he has containment options." She looked at Marcus. "He is running. He is scared and making it look like leverage." Marcus's face had gone somewhere she had not seen it go before. Not cold, not calculating. The specific heat of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has now run out of patience entirely. "Crane has a property outside the city," he said. "Ravenswood Corridor west of Bington. He has used it as a secondary operations site for years. I never questioned it because I trusted him to manage his own infrastructure." A pause at the word trusted, brief and controlled. "My team can be positioned there." "He said he will know if I do not come alone," Nora said. "He has had this building under surveillance long enough to know my phone number and my mother's doctor's name. Do not underestimate the infrastructure he built." "Not today." Marcus looked at her. "You are not going there alone." "He is expecting me," she said. "He is expecting a scared woman from a basement who is going to hand him the drive and go home. Let him think that." She met his eyes. "The moment you move on, Wraith publicly, Crane will know the window is closing, and whatever he has positioned near my mother gets activated before you can reach her. A team he will see coming is a team he can interpret as a threat. I go alone. He lets me in. You have the meeting." She held out her hand. "Give me a tracked phone. Your people will have my location the entire time. The moment anything changes, you manage it." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The calculation was there behind his eyes, but this time there was something else alongside it. Something that was not professional assessment. "You have been awake for nearly 20 hours, he said. "I am fine. You built a forensic presentation, survived a firefight, and now you want to walk into a meeting with a man who just threatened your family." "Yes." She held his gaze. "I was invisible for 4 years in this building. Tonight, that saved your life. This morning, it might save my mother's. I am asking you to let me use the one advantage I have left." The room was very still. Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a secondary phone, slim and unlabeled. "Tracked," he said. "My people will have eyes on your location the entire time." He held it out, but did not release it immediately. "Nora." His voice carried something she had not heard in it before, a weight that was not tactical. "If anything goes wrong, then you will have even more reasons to end this cleanly," she said. She took the phone. "Go to your meeting. Marcus, let me do what I came here to do." The address came through at 7:23, a text to her personal phone. No greeting, no name, just a street number on the western edge of Bington, 40 minutes outside the city, and a single line beneath it, "Come alone, south exit." Nora read it twice, memorized it, and showed it to Marcus without speaking. He looked at it for 3 seconds. "I know the road," he said. 3 properties, all crane-linked entities on paper. Middle one has a basement and 2 exits. He looked at her. "Give me 90 minutes before you move on Wraith. That is all I need." He held her gaze one more moment. Then he turned and went to manage what was his to manage. Nora picked up her bag and the secondary phone and walked to the south exit and out into a Chicago morning that was gray and cold and completely indifferent to everything that had happened inside Caldwell Tower in the last 7 hours. She found her car 2 blocks away where she had left it the previous morning. A 7-year-old Civic, the color of old concrete. She got in and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Her mother would be waking up right now. The routine was consistent. 7:15 medication with a small glass of orange juice. Then the news at low volume because loud sounds bothered her since the cardiac event 18 months ago. She would not know that her daughter had spent the night throwing flashlights at armed men on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper. She would not know about any of it. Nora started the car. The drive to Bington took 43 minutes. She used them to run through everything she knew about Elliott Crane. Not the financial architecture. She had that cold. The personal profile she had assembled from 4 years of processed documents. 61 years old, divorced twice, no children. A man who had built his entire identity around proximity to power without the visibility of power. The advisor, the facilitator, the man behind the men. 19 years of being essential and unacknowledged, trusted and overlooked. She knew what that did to a person, the slow accumulation of it. She understood it better than she wanted to. She was not going to feel sympathy for Elliott Crane, but she was going to use her understanding of him the way she used everything else, as a tool. The industrial corridor was exactly as Marcus had described, a flat stretch of road with 3 unremarkable properties behind chain-link fencing. The kind of buildings that existed in every mid-sized city's peripheral zones, the kind nobody looked at twice. She pulled in at the middle property at 8:16 in the morning and sat in the car for a moment. The gate was open, deliberately open. She walked through it. The building was low and wide, a warehouse structure with an office section attached to the front face, the kind of place designed to be forgotten. No signage, no security camera she could see, though she assumed there was one she could not. The office door was unlocked. She pushed through it into a space that smelled of stale coffee and old paper and the specific cold of rooms that get heated only occasionally. 3 metal desks pushed against one wall, all cleared. Filing cabinets along the back with drawers hanging open and empty. He was already stripping the place. Whatever Crane had kept here, he was moving it or had already moved it. Elliot Crane was standing at the far end of the room beside a door that led into the warehouse section. French cuffed shirt, silver hair precisely combed, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Nothing about his presentation acknowledged that it was 8 in the morning after a night in which everything had gone wrong for him. That precision was itself information. He was performing control because he did not have it. "Miss Voss," he said. "Mr. Crane." He studied her the way people rarely studied Nora, top to bottom, not with casual dismissal, but with the focused assessment of a man recalibrating a threat level in real time. "You look remarkably composed for someone who spent the night the way you did. I work well under pressure, evidently." He moved to one of the cleared desks and set a manila envelope on its surface. "The drive," he said. Nora reached into her blazer pocket and produced the encrypted drive. She held it in her palm without moving toward him. "My mother first," she said. "Your mother is fine. She will remain fine the moment I have that drive. I want confirmation." She kept her voice even. "I am going to call her right now while you are watching. She answers. She sounds like herself. Then we proceed." Something moved in Crane's expression, a brief tightening quickly controlled. He gestured with one hand. "Go ahead." Nora took out her personal phone and called her mother. 3 rings. 4. Her chest did something she ignored entirely. Her mother answered on the 5th ring, voice rough with sleep. "Nora, it is early, honey. I know. I am sorry. I just wanted to check in." She kept her voice the way it always sounded on a Sunday morning, unhurried, ordinary. "How are you feeling?" "Fine. Had a good night, actually." A pause. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. I am at the office. Go back to sleep." A beat. "I love you." "Love you too, sweetheart. You work too hard." She ended the call, her mother's voice, half asleep and safe and completely unaware, sat in her chest like something warm and terribly fragile. She looked at Crane and walked forward and held out the drive. He took it, turned it over once in his fingers, then set it on the desk beside the envelope and pushed the envelope toward her. "Debt clearance documentation," he said. "Your mother's account is zeroed as of this morning." Nora picked up the envelope. She did not open it. "Sit down," Crane said. He moved to the nearest desk chair and sat himself crossing one leg over the other in the manner of a man conducting a routine business meeting. "I want to explain something to you. You do not have to explain anything." "I want to." He folded his hands. "You are an intelligent woman. I have been aware of that since before last night, which I believe I mentioned. What you built in 6 weeks with limited access and no institutional support was," he paused, "genuinely impressive." Nora said nothing. "Marcus Vane is not a good man," Crane said. "What Wraith and I built was not born from greed, not primarily. It was born from 19 years of watching a man consolidate power over this city with complete disregard for the people inside his own organization. You put a contract on his life, Nora said. Yes. And you threatened my mother. Yes. Then I am going to need you to skip the part where you explain your principles to me because the math does not support them. Crane was quiet for a moment. A thin smile crossed his face, not warm, but genuine in its way. The expression of a man who respects an argument even when it dismantles him. Fair enough, he said. What happens now? Now I leave. You leave. Nora looked at him steadily. The drive goes with you. Marcus does not have what he needs to move against Wraith publicly. The situation reaches something like a stalemate. Crane nodded slowly. He looked at the drive on the desk. His confidence was real, she noted, settled. The confidence of a man who believed he had just closed the most important transaction of a difficult morning. He had made one significant miscalculation. He had assumed she brought him the original. She had brought him a copy, a clean duplicate made at 6:40 that morning when Marcus had given her network access and sat in the chair by the door reading his phone and not asking questions because he trusted her to manage the exchange. The original was with Petra Walling, locked in an internal secure server in the building Nora had left 90 minutes ago. Crane did not know that. He was holding a drive that contained the correct file structure, the correct encryption layer, the correct apparent content. He would not know until he tried to use it in a way that required verification against the source, by which point the morning would have already resolved itself entirely. Nora stood. One thing she said. Crane looked up. The infrastructure request, the auxiliary access points. She held his gaze. I flagged those line items when the request came through my office. You sent back a vendor justification. I accepted it because I did not have the standing to push back a second time. She paused. I have standing now. She walked out. The cold hit her face at the door, and she was grateful for it. She crossed the parking area with steady steps, got back into the Civic, pulled out of the lot, and drove 200 meters down the road before she pulled over and picked up Marcus's secondary phone and typed a single message. Clean drive is with him. Location confirmed. Then she put the phone on the passenger seat and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. Her hands were shaking, not violently, a fine, continuous tremor running from her wrists to her fingertips. The body's invoice for everything she had borrowed from it in the last 8 hours. She had not let them shake inside the warehouse. But here, alone in a car on a flat road outside Bington, with the gray November sky pressing down through the windshield, she let them. She breathed through it and looked at the sky and thought about her mother's voice on the phone. Half asleep. Safe. Not knowing. The secondary phone buzzed. One word from Marcus. Good. She put the car in drive. She was back on the highway when the phone rang. Marcus's number. She answered on the second ring. Wraith arrived at the building 30 minutes early, Marcus said. He knows something is wrong. Has he seen the evidence? He is being brought to the Grand Hall now. The captains are assembled. A pause. He is going to see you when you walk in. I know. He will come at you immediately. I know that too. A longer pause. How far out are you? 20 minutes. Drive faster, Marcus said, and ended the call. She drove faster. She was on the 42nd floor at 9:04 in the morning, and Petra Walling was waiting for her outside the elevator. A compact woman in her late 40s with the calm, watchful energy of someone who had processed a significant amount of information about the previous night and was being careful about what she did with it. "He has been asking about you," Petra said without preamble. "Wraith, since he walked in, asking who was in the building last night, what Marcus told him." "What did Marcus tell him?" "Nothing yet. He is holding the room." Petra looked at her, top to bottom. The same recalibration Crane had done, but different in quality. Less threat assessment, more something Nora did not have a precise word for yet. "Are you ready for this?" "No," Nora said. "Let us go." The grand hall of Caldwell Tower was on the 40th floor, and it was exactly what its name suggested. High ceilings, dark wood and steel, a long conference table that could seat 20, crystal lighting designed to convey both luxury and the particular weight of decisions made beneath it. The kind of room built to make people feel what happened inside it. When Nora walked through the door behind Petra, 11 faces turned toward her. She knew most of them by file. 7 captains, 3 senior operational staff, and at the head of the table Marcus Vane, standing in a charcoal suit with his hands at his sides and his face showing precisely nothing, and Desmond Wraith standing to Marcus's left. When Nora walked in, she watched the recognition move through Wraith's face in real time. The initial dismissal, the automatic contempt, and then the recalibration, because he was reading the room, and the room was not responding to Nora Voss's presence, the way a room full of powerful men had always responded to Nora Voss's presence. And that dissonance hit him like something cold pressed against the back of his neck. "What is she doing here?" Wraith said. The question was directed at Marcus, but his eyes were on Nora. He was 63 broad in the shoulder, with the look of a man who had been physically powerful in his 40s and retained the memory of it in his posture. Silver hair close cropped, a scar on his chin she had always noticed from a distance without ever being close enough to see clearly. She was close enough now. "Because she has something to show you," Marcus said. Nora walked to the presentation terminal at the side of the room without hurrying. She plugged in the drive the original retrieved from Petra's custody and pulled up the master file. The entity chart appeared on the room's main screen, large enough that every person at the table could see it without leaning forward. The room went very still. Wraith looked at the screen. She watched him look at it. She watched the understanding move across his face in layers. Recognition first, then calculation, then something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it, the particular expression of a man who has spent months building something and is now watching someone else name every piece of it from across a room. "This is fabricated," he said. "The incorporation records are public documents," Nora said. "Meridian Strategies, LLC, registered in Delaware 18 months ago. I can give you the state filing number. You are welcome to verify it independently." "Where did you get this?" "I built it." She moved to the next panel, the transfer chain, the money enters the Caldwell network through standard operational receivables. It exits through 6 layered entities, all ultimately controlled by the same beneficial owner. She clicked through. The authorization signature page appeared. The initiation signature on each transfer belongs to a level 4 clearance holder. Wraith's jaw was set. He had not moved from his position beside Marcus. "You are standing in this room, accusing me of finish that sentence," Marcus said. The quality of his voice stopped the room the way a hand pressed against a door stops it. Not loud, not heated. The specific calm of someone who has decided and is waiting for the moment to arrive. Wraith looked at Marcus, then back at Nora. His eyes were doing something complicated. The calculation of a man trying to find the move that still exists, the exit that has not been closed yet. She waited because she had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you could do in any situation was let the truth speak at its own pace and not fill the silence before it did. "There is a co-authorization," Nora said, "a second signature on the confirmation layer. It routes through a hardware relay installed in this building 8 months ago under the cover of a network infrastructure upgrade." She clicked to the next panel. The access point installation documentation appeared on screen. The relay borrowed a level 4 credential to mask the true origin of the co-authorization. She paused. Elliot Crane is the second architect of this operation. The sound that moved through the room was not loud, a collective shift in breath, the physical response of 11 people updating their understanding of the world they had been operating inside. "Crane is being located," Marcus said to the room. His voice carried that same precise calm. "Wraith will be held in this building pending full review." He looked at each captain in turn, a slow circuit of the table. "Anyone who wants to examine the evidence independently is welcome to do so. The source documentation is here and verifiable." He paused. "Anyone who wants to question Miss Voss's presence in this room can take that up with me directly." Wraith made his move then. He was faster than Nora had registered as possible, which was a failure of imagination. She logged immediately and would not repeat. He had been standing close to Marcus, and he moved in one motion. Left hand going to Marcus's arm. Right hand coming up with something small and dark from inside his jacket. Nora's body reacted before her mind caught up with what it was doing. She shoved the presentation terminal into his path, the metal edge of it catching his forearm as the weapon discharged, once into the ceiling, with a sound that compressed the air in the room into a single flat shock. Then Marcus had him. It was not a long physical altercation. Marcus was not the kind of man who needed length. Wraith went down against the edge of the table with his arm locked behind him at an angle that made the choice between compliance and a broken shoulder extremely clear. 2 captains were on their feet. One had a weapon drawn. Petra's hand was inside her jacket. The room was frozen in the specific tableau of a space that has just become a crime scene and is waiting to find out what kind. Nora was standing 3 feet from the terminal with her heart slamming against her sternum and the taste of adrenaline metallic at the back of her throat. Her ears were ringing from the discharge. She ran a fast inventory. She had not been hit. "Sit down," Marcus said to the room, and his voice was so level it was almost worse than shouting would have been. People sat down. Wraith was on the floor, breathing hard. His face carried the particular expression of a man who has just located the precise line he crossed and understands that there is no return from it. Marcus straightened. He looked at Nora. She looked back at him. Her hands were completely still. Later, they would not be. Right now, they were. The documentation, Marcus said to the room, not breaking her gaze for a full second before he turned back to the table. "Review it, all of it. I want every captain's independent assessment by noon." Then his phone rang. He answered it, listened for approximately 4 seconds. His face did something she had not seen it do before. Not panic, not shock. The compressed stillness of a man receiving information that changes the geometry of everything he has been managing for the last 9 hours. The call lasted 11 seconds. Marcus lowered the phone and looked at it the way you look at something that has just fundamentally rearranged the next several hours. Then he looked up at Petra. "Crane is not in Bington anymore." Petra straightened. "Where?" "Mercy General." The name landed on Nora like a physical impact. She heard it the way you hear something when the signal and the meaning arrive a half-second apart. Perfectly clear and completely wrong. And then the second half-second collapsed, and there was only one interpretation, and it was the one she had been holding back from since 6:58 that morning. Mercy General, her mother's hospital. She was moving before the thought completed itself. Marcus caught her arm at the door, not roughly, but absolute. "He has already been detained," Marcus said. She stopped. "My people have had eyes on your mother's location since 4 this morning." His voice was direct, no softening, because he had correctly identified that softening was not what she needed right now. When Crane's vehicle was tracked, leaving Bington 40 minutes ago, they moved to intercept. He got as far as the hospital parking structure. "Nora." He held her gaze. "He is in custody. Your mother does not know any of it happened." Nora stood in the doorway of the grand hall with 11 people behind her, and Marcus's hand on her arm, and the specific physical sensation of a catastrophe that did not happen, which is its own kind of violence. The body had already begun to absorb the disaster before the mind understood it had been stopped. She breathed. "She is fine," Marcus said. "I know," Nora said. "You said she is fine." She breathed again. "I need a minute. Take it." She walked out into the corridor and stood at the window that looked north over the city and put one hand flat against the glass. Cold in the way that November glass is always cold. She stood there for 60 seconds with her eyes open, and the city in front of her and the sound of her own pulse gradually returning to something that did not feel like emergency. Then she went back into the room. Wraith was in a chair with 2 of Marcus's men on either side, his left wrist restrained. The weapon had been bagged. The ceiling tile showed a dark crater that nobody was looking at. 7 captains were examining the presentation screen or their own printed copies of the documentation. Captain Halloran, heavy-set, skeptical eyes, the kind of face that had spent decades being shown things by people who wanted something, was leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his chin in one hand. Halfway through the second hour, Halloran looked up from the authorization trace. "Walk me back through the credential borrowing," he said. Nora walked him back through it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You built this yourself. 6 weeks, no assistance, no institutional access. Correct. From the basement, yes." Halloran looked at Marcus. Something passed between them that Nora did not have the context to fully decode. Old history, the shorthand of men who had been in rooms together for a long time. Then Halloran looked back at Nora and nodded once and sat back. It was she understood a verdict. Wraith said nothing during the 2-hour review. He had stopped fighting at some point in the first hour, not capitulated visibly, not broken, but reached the place a man reaches when he runs out of moves and simply waits for the arithmetic to finish. He sat with his back straight and his eyes on the table. He was, Nora thought, more unsettling in this stillness than he had been when he was fighting, because the stillness of a man like Desmond Wraith when he accepts defeat is the stillness of something that is not finished, only paused. She watched him when she thought he was not watching her. Once he looked up and their eyes met, and he held her gaze for a long moment. She had expected contempt. What she saw instead was something she did not have a clean name for. Acknowledgement, perhaps, in the particular form it takes when someone who has dismissed you completely is forced to revise every assumption they built on that dismissal. She did not look away first. She did not look away at all. At 12:47, Marcus dismissed the captains. They filed out with the subdued, careful energy of people who have been given a great deal to think about and have correctly identified that silence is the appropriate response to a room like this on a morning like this. Halloran was last. He paused at the door and looked back at Nora. "Good work," he said. In the way a man says something, he means precisely, and nothing more than that. Then he was gone. It was Marcus, Petra, Nora, and Wraith. Marcus stood at the head of the table and looked at the man who had been his right hand for 11 years and said nothing for a moment, just looked. And Wraith looked back. Whatever was between them in that silence was between them. Nora did not try to read it. Some calculations are private. "You had 11 years," Marcus said, finally. Wraith said nothing. "You had every resource I had, every access. You built what you built because I trusted you to build it." He paused. "And you decided that was not enough. It was never about enough." Wraith's voice was rough but even, the voice of a man who had prepared this at least. "You do not share power, Marcus. You hold it. You have been holding it for 20 years, and every person in your orbit is either an instrument or a threat. I got tired of being an instrument, so you tried to make me a corpse." "Yes." The word sat in the room without apology. Marcus nodded slowly. At least that is honest. It is all I have left. Marcus turned away from him. He spoke quietly to Petra. She moved to Wraith and said something to the two men guarding him, and Wraith was escorted out without drama. Not roughly, not gently, with the neutral efficiency of a process that had already concluded. At the door, Wraith stopped. He looked back at the room, at Marcus first, then at Nora. "You should have stayed in the basement," he said to her, not viciously. Almost, she searched for the word almost, with something close to respect that had been left out in the cold too long to find its way back to warmth. "I know," Nora said. "It was more comfortable." Something crossed his face. He left. The grand hall was quiet. Outside, 40 floors down, the city moved through its midday routines. Cabs, pedestrians, the indifferent machinery of a place that did not know and would not care about the specific weight of what had just concluded inside this building. Petra left to manage the crane situation. Nora stood at the presentation terminal, for a moment looking at the entity chart still on the screen. Meridian Strategies, Stone Ridge, the chain of shells, the authorization trail, all of it still glowing on the display like a diagram of a war that was now over. She reached over and closed the file. Marcus was at the window, the same window she had stood at during the night, both hands in his jacket pockets, looking out with the particular stillness of a man at the end of something very long. She joined him, not close, a comfortable distance between them. "The hardware relay is being pulled from the building today," Marcus said. "Crane's cooperation with federal contact is partial, enough to make himself useful. He will retain enough to feel he has leverage." He paused. "He does not. And the financial trail, the one pointing at you. Your documentation establishes the relay infrastructure. The credential borrowing is verifiable by any forensic accountant with access to the source materials." He glanced at her briefly. "A competent one. The false trail falls apart the moment the mechanism is exposed, which I built into the evidence package," Nora said. It seemed relevant. It was the most relevant thing in the package. They stood at the window. November had thinned slightly toward noon, the cloud cover breaking in one place to let something that was not quite sunlight through. Not beautiful exactly, just honest. Chicago in November was always honest. "Your mother's debt," Marcus said. "Whatever arrangement Crane made this morning will not hold. His financial instruments are being unraveled." He looked at the window. "I will take care of it. That is not necessary. It is not a transaction." He said it without turning. "You do not owe me anything for it. I am telling you it will be handled because it should be." She looked at him, his profile against the gray light. She thought about the way he had said her name in the corridor on 38 at 4 in the morning, not as a label, not as information, as something he was learning the weight of. Why, she said. He turned to look at her. "Because you threw a flashlight across a room to save my life before you had any reason to believe I was worth saving." He held her gaze. "That has a value, I understand, even if I do not have a ledger entry for it." Nora looked back at the window. "I do not want a position offered out of obligation," she said. "I know what you are going to propose. Senior something. Strategic role. I know how this is supposed to go. What do you want? The question sat there the way Marcus asked most things, clean and direct, no scaffolding around it, no implication that the answer needed to be modest or grateful or appropriately small. Nora thought about it. 4 years in a basement, 65 hours a week in a room that smelled like mildew, work that kept an organization running while the people running it could not have identified her face. The particular loneliness of being in the right place, doing the right work, and having it mean nothing to anyone, including yourself, after long enough. She thought about a freight elevator going up in the dark, a steel flashlight crossing a room in a flat, hard line, a drive in her pocket that was going to change the shape of a war she had not started. She thought about her mother on the phone at 8 in the morning, half asleep, safe not knowing. I want what I have already earned, she said. I want the work to mean what the work actually means. I want to sit in the rooms where decisions happen, not because you are doing me a favor, but because the skill set is real, and you know it is real, and I know it is real. She paused. And I want the basement refurbished. That carpet is a health hazard. Something moved across Marcus's face. Not a smile exactly, something drier and more genuine than a smile. The expression of a man who finds something specifically unexpected and does not have a prepared response to it. Chief Strategic Officer, he said. That is a very large title. It is an accurate one. She looked at him. The organization has structural problems beyond the financial architecture. The way information moves through the hierarchy. There are bottlenecks that Crane and Wraith exploited precisely because the structure made them invisible. Fixing the money trail does not fix those. I know. I have thoughts about it. I know that too. He held her gaze. I intend to hear them. They stood at the window for another moment. The light through the clouds was doing something slightly different now, not breaking through entirely, spreading itself across the gray in a way that was softer than the morning had been. The carpet, Marcus said. What color? Blue, Nora said. Something with actual color in it. The people who work down there spend 60 hours a week in that room. They should have something worth looking at. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then changed the carpet. I will, too blue, too blue. 3 days later, the offices on the 38th floor were reassigned. Nora moved her desk, the same desk, because she was particular about her desk, from the basement to a corner office with 2 windows and a door that locked from the inside. The basement carpet was replaced within the week. The new office coordinator, a young woman named Tierney, who had transferred from operations and had the efficient wariness of someone given very little information and tasked with deducing the rest, asked Nora what color she wanted for the replacement flooring. Nora said anything that was not mustard yellow. Tierney wrote that down very seriously. The 2 accountants who had worked in the basement alongside her, a quiet woman named Janet Moss, and a methodical man named Philip Ware, who had never joined in the general dismissal of Nora, but had also never done anything to stop it, were both given raises and revised reporting structures. Nora processed that paperwork herself. She signed it with her actual title and did not find the signature as strange as she had expected to. Owen Mace resigned on the fourth day after the Grand Hall meeting. 2 sentences, no explanation. Marcus accepted it without comment. Nora did not ask what had been established about his role in the events of that night. She had given Marcus her observation and her reasoning, and then let it be his. Some things were his to carry. She had enough of her own. Crane cooperated with the federal contact, partially, strategically. The admission of enough to make himself useful, the retention of enough to feel he had some remaining leverage. The hardware relay was physically removed from the executive floors by a team Marcus supervised personally. Nora wrote a new infrastructure procurement protocol requiring triple verification for any access point installation above the 30th floor, and presented it to the captains in a meeting that was shorter and quieter than the Grand Hall meeting, but felt in its way more significant. The first thing that happened after the storm, rather than during it, the work of building something instead of defending something. Halloran asked 2 questions and approved it. Wraith did not go to trial in any public sense. The specific mechanisms of what happened to him were not things Nora was told, and she did not ask. She understood that there were parts of the architecture she was inside and parts she was adjacent to, and that this distinction was not a failure but a boundary she had with some deliberate thought chosen to maintain. She was good at what she was good at. Marcus did what Marcus did. The work between those 2 facts was the work they were building together, and it did not require her to know everything. She thought about that sometimes, whether it troubled her. It troubled her the way most honest complications did, not cleanly, not simply, but in a way she could carry without being flattened by it. She visited her mother on the Sunday after the Grand Hall meeting, drove out to the house in Bridgeview, the small frame house where she had grown up, and sat in the kitchen drinking tea that was too sweet the way her mother had always made it. Her mother talked about the neighbor's new dog and the drainage problem in the backyard, and the documentary she had been watching on the streaming service her neighbor's son had set up for her. She did not ask Nora why she looked tired. She looked at her the way mothers look at their adult children when they sense something enormous has happened and have made the quiet calculation that the child will tell them when the child is ready, and what they can offer in the meantime is the specific grace of ordinary conversation. Nora sat at that kitchen table and drank the too sweet tea and talked about the neighbor's dog, and felt the particular emotion that has no clean name, the intersection of exhaustion and relief and love, and the specific gratitude of someone who has been reminded that the thing they nearly lost is still exactly where they left it. On the drive back into the city, she cried for about 8 minutes, not dramatically, just steadily, the way the body releases something when it finally has the privacy to do it. Then she stopped and merged onto the expressway and thought about the infrastructure protocol presentation she had scheduled for Thursday, and whether she should add a 4th verification tier for server hardware or whether that was overcorrection. She decided It was overcorrection. She removed the fourth tier. 6 weeks. After the night in the basement, Marcus called her to the 42nd floor at 7 in the evening. The building had emptied to its skeleton staff. The city, through the windows, was doing what it did at that hour, going dark at the edges, first lights coming up in sequence. The skyline resolving itself from a gray shape into something precise and lit and entirely itself. He had 2 glasses on the low table by the window. Whiskey neat. Not a question. Not an offer. The assumption of a man who had been paying attention. She sat across from him and took the glass and looked out at the city. The Meridian recovery is complete, he said. Shell dissolution is finished. The financial architecture is clean. I know. I signed off on the final reconciliation this morning. The captains reviewed Petra's full file. Complete confidence. She is good at her job, Nora said. Yes. A pause. There is a situation developing in the Western District. Territorial. Nothing connected to what happened here. You are not telling me this because you need me to know about territorial friction in the Western District, Nora said. No. He held his glass without drinking from it. I am telling you because I have been telling you things in the evening, and it has become a habit. Nora looked at him. He was looking at the window, his profile against the city lights, and there was something in his posture that was different from the command posture she had catalogued over the past 6 weeks. Something quieter and more deliberate. The posture of a man who has thought about what he is about to say for longer than the sentence will take. You could have left, he said, at every point that night, the maintenance corridor, the freight elevator, after the panic room. You had options each time. We have covered this. We covered your reasons. I know your reasons. He turned to look at her. I am saying something different. She waited. I have had people around me for 20 years, Marcus said. Loyal people, capable people, people who stayed because of what I could offer them, or what they understood would happen if they did not. He paused. You stayed because of a flashlight and a freight elevator and a drive in your blazer pocket. And by the time you had any reason to stay, for the reasons people stay, you had already handed me everything and walked into a room with Crane alone. I had a tracked phone. Nora. She looked at him. I am not good at this, he said, flatly. The way he said most things that he meant. I am telling you that up front, so you have complete information. I am aware, she said. You are precise and controlled, and you calculate everything, and you are not accustomed to variables you cannot fully account for. Yes, you are the most significant one I have encountered. He held her gaze. I find I am not interested in accounting for you. I am interested in whatever this is, whatever it is becoming. Nora looked at her glass. The city outside was fully dark now and fully lit. The version of itself it became at night, different from the daytime city, less negotiable, more honest. She thought about who she had been 6 weeks ago. The desk in the corner back to the wall. The work nobody read. The accumulation of days that looked the same from inside them and then looked from this distance like a kind of waiting, not passive, not giving up, but the specific patience of something that has not found its moment yet. "I am not good at this either," she said. "I am good at numbers and infrastructure and staying in rooms that are on fire." She paused. "I have spent a long time making myself take up less space. It is going to take some time to stop doing that reflexively." "I know." He said it without making it a consolation, just the acknowledgement of a fact he had already incorporated into his calculations. "You will have to be patient with that." "I have patience for things that are worth it," Marcus said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with that expression she still did not fully have a name for. Not the assessment face, not the command face. The third one she had been cataloging since the panic room. The one that appeared in the specific moments when he had apparently stopped calculating and was simply present. She picked up her glass and looked back out at the city. "The carpet," she said. He waited. "They went with gray. I said anything but mustard yellow, and Tierney chose gray. It is fine." She considered it, but I think it should have been blue. Something with actual color in it. The people who work down there spend 60 hours a week in that room. They should have a color worth looking at. "Change the carpet," Marcus said. "I will." "To blue." "To blue," Nora agreed. The city ran itself out to every horizon beyond the glass, indifferent and enormous, and full of the specific energy of a place that does not keep track of what happens inside its buildings. The wars, the betrayals, the freight elevators going up in the dark, the women who throw things across rooms and change the outcome of something no one outside those walls will ever know was that close to going the other way. Nora Voss sat in a 42nd floor office with a glass of whiskey and the skyline in front of her, and she took up exactly as much space as she occupied, and it was she was beginning to understand precisely enough. She was not invisible. She had not been invisible for 6 weeks. She did not think she would remember how to be, even if she tried. The city glittered. The room was warm. The work tomorrow was real and specific and hers. And the man across from her was complicated and difficult and looking at her like she was something worth looking at. And her mother was home in Bridgeview, sleeping safely through an ordinary night. There were worse things to have built from a flashlight and a drive and 4 years in a basement. There were considerably worse things. She finished the whiskey. When Marcus asked if she wanted another, she said yes. And the city outside did what it always did, burned itself bright against the dark, and did not explain itself, and did not need to.